Chapter 3 is called An Important Paper. Stop, said Annie. We turn here, onto 5th Street, then onto Chestnut Street. Jack and Annie trudged through the heat until they came to Chestnut Street. It was much quieter and calmer than Market. Look, that's it, said Jack. He pointed to a brick building with paned windows and a tall bell tower. A sign in front said Pennsylvania State House. Great, said Annie. So this is the place. We say we're delivering Dr. Ben's midday meal, and then to get his attention, we say we're from the press. That's what the rhyme tells us to do. Got it, said Jack. Let's go. Jack and Annie walked up a pebbled path to the State House. When they reached the brick building, they knocked on the front door. No one came to let them in. Annie tried to turn the door's handle, but it was locked. Looking around, Jack noticed that all the windows were closed. Most of the blinds were drawn. No one's here, he said. He felt sweaty and tired from the humid heat. We came here for nothing. Darn, said Annie. Maybe we should go back to Dr. Ben's house and wait for him there. Suddenly, the door swung open. A guard in a blue jacket and white pants stood before them. He looks like a soldier from the American Revolution, Jack thought. No guests are allowed to enter, the guard said. But, sir, we're not guests, Annie said politely. We're delivering a midday meal to Dr. Ben. It's from his daughter, Miss Sarah. All right, come in, said the guard. He moved away from the door. Thanks, said Annie. She and Jack stepped into the building. The doctor is in the assembly room, the guard said, pointing down the hall. Wait outside the room until they take a break. Yes, sir, said Jack. Jack and Annie tiptoed down the dark, shadowy hallway. Listen, said Annie. Loud voices were coming from a room ahead. The door was half open, so she and Jack peeked inside. This must be the assembly room, whispered Jack. The large room had high ceilings and 2 fireplaces. The tall windows were framed by heavy drapes. Men sat at tables with green tablecloths. They wore long jackets and shirts with white ruffled collars. They all had hair that came to their shoulders. At the front of the room, a white-haired man sat on a raised platform in a high-backed chair. He seemed to be in charge. Another man stood at a front table, hurriedly writing. Several men were talking. Gentlemen, you are wrong. No, you want to give too much power to the national government. He is correct. But we have no Bill of Rights or freedom of speech. What about trial by jury? The man in charge banged a gavel against the desk. Order, he said. Raise your hands if you wish to speak. What's going on? Annie whispered to Jack. I'm not sure, Jack whispered back. I'll check our book. He reached into his bag and pulled out their Pennsylvania book. He opened to the chapter about old Philadelphia. He turned the page. Whoa, Jack whispered. He showed Annie a painting in the book. Look, it's the same. Annie looked at the painting and then back at the men in the room. It's this meeting, Annie whispered. What's going on? They read silently. In 1787, after the Revolutionary War, America was made up of 13 separate colonies. Each was like a different country. Would the colonies remain separate or become a nation of states? That summer, 55 delegates met in Philadelphia to answer this question. James Madison took daily notes on the meetings. In the end, he wrote America's most important document. Oh, man, thought Jack. He understood everything now. Annie, I get it, she whispered. She repeated a line from Morgan's message. A paper must be signed. I know, whispered Jack. They're creating the United States Constitution. The Constitution? "That's a big deal," whispered Annie. "A huge deal," whispered Jack. He and Annie read more. The document was the United States Constitution. It contained the basic laws that defined how the American government works. The Constitution created the presidency, the Supreme Court, and the Congress. James Madison's work made him known as the father of the Constitution. Besides Madison, some of the most famous delegates were General George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and Dr. Benjamin Franklin. "Dr. Ben," said Jack. "I think I see him," whispered Annie. "Where?" said Jack. "There," said Annie, "the old man in the glasses." Annie pointed to an older man with wispy gray hair and glasses. He was wiping his face with a handkerchief. "Yes," whispered Jack, "that's Dr. Benjamin Franklin." Chapter 4 is called How Strange. "Benjamin Franklin," Annie whispered. "I can't believe it," said Jack. "I've seen him on posters at home," said Annie, "for a show at the Little Theater, Ben Franklin in Paris." "Right," said Jack. The gardener was making sense after all, he thought. Jack knew that Benjamin Franklin was a scientist, an inventor, a diplomat, a writer, and almost anything else you could think of. "Where's George Washington?" whispered Annie. "He must be in the front," said Jack. He pointed to the white-haired man in the high-backed chair on the platform. The general was much older than he was when they had met him in 1776, but he still looked strong and powerful. "I wonder if he'll remember us," whispered Annie. "I hope he doesn't," said Jack. "He's a lot older, and we're not. That would be really hard to explain." "That man writing must be James Madison," said Annie. She pointed to the small, thin man writing at the front table. George Washington banged his gavel again and rose up from his chair. "We must stop now," he said. "Let us put aside our differences and enjoy a meal together." The delegates began rising from their chairs. Some were still grumbling and shaking their heads. George Washington walked over to Ben Franklin. Ben leaned on his walking stick as the two men spoke quietly. "Let's go," said Annie. "Wait," said Jack. "We need to plan what we're going to say to him." But before he could stop her, Annie hurried across the room with Ben's food basket. "Oh, man," thought Jack, following her. Ben caught sight of them. "Hello, children," he said with a friendly smile. George Washington looked startled when he saw Jack and Annie. "Have we met before?" he asked in his deep, calm voice. Actually," Annie started, but then stopped. Jack shook his head. So here they are, talking to Ben Franklin. "I know," said George Washington. "You remind me of two children I met during the war." "How strange." "Really?" said Annie. "Yes, they were remarkable," said George Washington. "But that was 11 years ago. They would be grown up by now. I've thought about them often." Jack glanced at Annie, trying to hide a smile. "What can we do for you children?" Ben asked. "Sir, we brought your midday meal. It's from your daughter, Sarah," said Annie. She held on to the basket of food. "Oh, well, thank you," said Ben, chuckling. He took the basket and set it down on the nearest table. "Celery and cabbage, no doubt. Sarah's always trying to keep me healthy." George Washington smiled. "Enjoy your meal, my friend," he said to Ben. "If you'd prefer steak, pie, and beer, join us at the tavern." With a nod to Jack and Annie, George Washington left them. "Tell me, how did you happen to deliver my meal today?" Ben asked Annie. His eyes were bright with curiosity. "I was expecting Louis." Louis was supposed to bring it," said Annie, "but he went swimming. So we told John we would do it." "How kind of you," said Ben. "And what are your names?" "Jack and Annie," said Jack. "Well, thank you very much, Jack and Annie," said Ben Franklin, "and good day to both of you." As Ben started to walk away, Jack remembered Morgan's message. "Sir," he blurted out, "we're from the press." Ben whirled around. "The press? The Gazette?" Yes, Jack answered. What was the Gazette, he wondered. "No, no, oh dear no," whispered Ben. "The Gazette is sending children to report on us." He looked around anxiously. "We must leave at once. Come quickly. Follow me." Using his walking stick, Ben hobbled to the doorway of the assembly room. Jack was confused. What had they done? "Sir, sir," he said as they rushed down the hallway after Ben. "We're actually—" "Quiet, quiet, not here. Not another word. That way, out the back," said Ben. Using his cane, he hurried to the back of the State House. "This way, come with me," he said. He opened the door and stepped outside. Jack and Annie followed Ben Franklin into the burning summer heat. And that's the end of chapter 4.